Okay, guys, there is a very problematic issue that we need to talk about, and that is Ashkenazi privilege, or you could otherwise call it Ashkenazi white privilege. Because one thing that I've noticed in the international Jewish community is that the more white-skinned Jews seem to have a lot of privilege over the darker-skinned Jews. If you think about all the most famous Jews, in entertainment, politics, people like George Soros, it's overwhelmingly Ashkenazi and overwhelmingly white-skinned. I understand that there's the idea that Jews don't consider themselves white, but the fact is the vast majority of the population does consider Ashkenazi Jews to be white. And therefore, they would obviously also benefit from white privilege, since the vast majority of people see them as white. But I notice a absurd amount of white Ashkenazi privilege in Israel in particular. Now, you can call America a racist country all you want, but the fact is America elected a black president. Now, Israel has a very confusing system. It has a president and a prime minister, but the prime minister is really the most powerful figure. And Israel has never had a non-Ashkenazi prime minister. I'm not sure if they've had a non-Ashkenazi president, but the president is largely just for show, largely ceremonial. So yes, every prime minister, every head of state of Israel has been Ashkenazi, even though the majority of Israel's Jewish population are in fact Sephardim. So never even mind the idea of Israel having an Arab head of state. They haven't even elected a head of state who's a darker shade of Jewish. Now, the Sephardim, otherwise known as the Mizrahi, I believe the terms are somewhat interchangeable, although perhaps not totally. They tend to be Jews descended from North Africa and from the Middle East. Now, there's a widespread knowledge among Israelis. If you talk to Sephardim, Mizrahi Israelis, they'll tell you all about Ashkenazi privilege. They'll tell you all about how their nation's founding myth is basically entirely centered on, the Ashkenazis who fled persecution in Europe, and how the Sephardim, who also fled persecution in the Muslim world, are very much ignored when discussing their country's founding myth. They focus so much on, the Nazis and the Holocaust to the extent of completely ignoring the plight of the Sephardim. So, and we see these socioeconomic inequalities all kinds of ways. There's definitely a very, very strong system of Ashkenazi white privilege that exists in Israel and exists throughout the Jewish diaspora as well. And when you think of a Jew, you typically think of someone, with white skin, perhaps vaguely Middle Eastern facial features, but still, a whiter looking person. So, I think we really need to combat this white Ashkenazi privilege that exists in the Jewish community, because after all, the Jews, they've always been such forerunners of progress and anti-racism and progressivism in other areas, and we should all be so thankful to them for doing this. But I've noticed that they just have this blind spot. It's like they want to help all the rest of us be progressive. They want to help us all so much to recognize our privilege and check our privilege and to correct our inequalities. They've been so selfless that they've forgotten to look inward at their own community. And they've done so much good for the rest of us by pointing out our privilege and inequality and helping us to rectify these issues that I think we just need to lend a helping hand back and help the Jewish community recognize its own inherent inequalities and its own inherent racial privileges that exist within their own community.